The NBA will rue the day that it made the decision to not have the Memphis Grizzlies on Christmas Day. Once more, the San Antonio Spurs instead of Memphis. Really? You're buying into Victor Wembanyama like that? I'm going to talk about why the NBA made a mistake and so much more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for being with me wherever you're checking out the podcast, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies. And I'm thrilled that you've chosen to join me on this episode of the show. My name is Joe Mullinax. I'm the host for this episode of the podcast. No DeMichael Cole. He took a well-deserved weekend, little vacation, little break. He'll be back on our next episode. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can find us. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, as I mentioned before. We are very grateful for the wonderful following we've built on YouTube. We're almost at 4,000 subscribers there. Continue to subscribe in an audio form as well. Whatever your preference is, we're happy to have you here on Locked On Grizzlies. And I am happy to be mad again, dear listener, dear viewer, because those of you that are everydayers, folks that check out the podcast every time an episode drops, you know that every once in a while I get fired up. And I feel like I haven't had a chance to do that lately. I've been pretty even keel. I've been pretty low key. My co-host, Michael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, he likes to get a chuckle every once in a while at my expense when I get on one of my tirades, and I understand why. I watch back these episodes on YouTube. I listen to them every once in a while. And by every once in a while, I mean I'm an everydayer of our own show. When I listen, I hear the tint of anger in my voice. I get a laugh out of it too. But I feel like I've been pretty calm this offseason. They haven't really done anything that made me that mad. Even the Donovan Clingan stuff, right? Zach Edey, I've talked myself into that. And if you can't trade up, you can't trade up. It is what it is. But I feel the energy coming back, dear listener, dear viewer. I feel that rage percolating underneath at the surface, and it's about the NBA's Christmas Day schedule. Now, I have been covering the Memphis Grizzlies for a long time, since 2013, when I first started writing over at Grizzly Bear Blues, then part of the SB Nation network. And over the last decade plus, I've talked about and written about the Memphis Grizzlies just about as much as anybody that covers the team. And I am well aware that Memphis is the smallest market in the NBA. I am well aware that they are not a prime location or a prime franchise to be hosting a Christmas Day game, right? Or to even be participating in a Christmas Day game. They did a couple of years ago, but that was the first time in Memphis Grizzlies history. Silly me for assuming that the NBA would understand that one of the biggest stars in the NBA, Ja Morant, is going to be coming back and almost certainly, by most accounts, is going to be on a redemption tour for the ages. Silly me for thinking that the NBA might be intrigued by this and say, interesting. Maybe Ja Morant should be heading to New York. Maybe Ja Morant should be taking on the Dallas Mavericks. No. Niet, nay. However you want to say, negatory, good buddy, good pal, good chum. The Memphis Grizzlies are not playing on Christmas Day. It was reported a few days ago by Shams Charania of The Athletic. Spurs at Knicks, which will draw the ire here momentarily. Timberwolves at Mavericks. 76ers at Celtics. Lakers at Warriors. Nuggets at Suns. I want to stress, 9 of those 10 teams I have no issues with. New York is always going to host a Christmas Day game in Madison Square Garden. Always. It's just going to happen. The Timberwolves, one of the best teams in the NBA this past season. The Mavericks made the NBA Finals. Philadelphia 76ers with Joel Embiid. Now they have Paul George. Boston Celtics literally just won the NBA Finals. The Lakers have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Steph Curry, the Olympic connection that just happened. We'll talk more about that Olympic team here momentarily and the way they won the gold medal. Nikola Jokic, Kevin Durant and the Suns, and Nikola Jokic, with the Denver Nuggets. I have no issues with 9 of those 10. It's the 10th team where I have a bit of a frustration, and it's with Victor Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs. It feels very much, at least to me, and I'll be honest, this is an opinion, okay? Statistical data, I don't have the research in front of me on this. I want to stress that. I feel like, as a consumer of media for my life, the Olympics are the bee's knees, his legs, and his arms for 2 or so weeks. And then the care about the Olympics doesn't pick up again until the next Olympics comes, right? And that doesn't belittle what those amazing athletes have done. I'm talking about the national attention span. Simone Biles, I would argue, I think you could easily argue at this point, is one of the greatest American athletes in the history of America, right? An Olympic sport in gymnastics. I'm not belittling those accomplishments. I'm talking about what content we consume and how often we consume it. There's a reason why gymnastics, there's a reason why all these other sports, track and field, swimming, everybody becomes an expert every 4 years. We respect their accomplishments, but those are not nationally popular sports like football in the United States, American football. And the NBA is a pretty clear number 2 at this stage. Well, technically number 3 behind college football. That's how much America loves football. But you understand my point. That Olympic connection to the Christmas Day games, or maybe they just see Wembanyama as a 7'5" attraction. You can let me know in the comments if you disagree with me here. I would understand more if they went with a team that isn't really the Grizzlies, right? Like if it wasn't the Spurs, who are pretty clearly going to be, they'll be improved, but I don't think they're going to be better than Memphis, right? Like I don't see that happening for them. Maybe you want to go with a team like the Houston Rockets. Maybe you want to go with a team in the Eastern Conference that has a little bit more pull in terms of that market. If you want to make it a New York specific day, maybe you have Brooklyn come in. Brooklyn's going to be bad. I'm not trying to say that. The Wembanyama love there, when you have a pissed off Ja Morant and a pretty perfectly primed takeover opportunity of the league, that seems like a miss to me. It seems like a miss. Ja Morant is entering his year 25 on this planet. It was his birthday over the weekend. Happy birthday to Ja. We'll talk about that to close the show. And all signs point to this being a redemption tour for the ages. Maybe the league doesn't trust Ja. And can you blame them? I mean, I illogically will blame them. But from a national perspective, I do think that forgot about Ja narrative is a fair one that's kind of developing. Brian Windhorst went on national radio recently, and they were talking about the 2028 Olympics like we did on Friday's episode. I said Ja Morant was a lock. Several people in the comments disagreed with me. Felt that Morant was not a lock. I most certainly think he is if he plays the way that he's capable of. Team USA needs a guy like Ja Morant. He has a skill set that's very valuable to what that team is going to look like without Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and LeBron James. But nationally, Windhorst points out 2 years ago, there was no Anthony Edwards being the face of the league or Tyrese Halliburton or any of these sorts of things. It was Ja Morant with all of the certainty. There was a Memphis Grizzlies day on ESPN. And Ja Morant has had some ups and downs since that time, but he's healthy and he looks primed for a big bounce back season. And I think that narrative of the redemption of Ja Morant is more interesting than Victor Wembanyama, the big guy who almost beat the Americans in the Olympics. Are they trying to make him the future face of the NBA? Maybe. But do you see that being an international player? That might be a good topic for DeMichael and I on a future episode. Can a Frenchman, can a Serbian, can somebody from Europe, as the world catches up to the United States in basketball, be the face of the league? I'm not sure. Maybe you can let me know in the comments how you're feeling about that. And like I said, I feel like we might have stumbled onto something there to talk about with DeMichael the next time that we're all together. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will be catching up with the Team USA roster, an Olympic gold medal for them. Very exciting. We'll talk about a massive weekend for Steph Curry in particular coming up next year on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die whip alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Things like superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you are looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it is easy to make your car the MVP and bring home a huge win. Keep your ride or die whip alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to United States customers. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're talking USA basketball. What a big win for them over the weekend. Gold medalists. How should we feel as Grizzlies fans? Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, host for this episode of the podcast and noted hater of Victor Wembanyama, apparently, after that prior segment. Look, Wembanyama's phenomenal, but there's a perfectly good narrative right there about Ja Morant. Maybe they don't want to give that to Memphis at this point, but I just think that's a swing and a miss. The other 9 teams I have no issue with. It's the Spurs that really bothers me. It's Spurs at Knicks. Could have been Grizzlies at Knicks pretty easily, but moving on. Team USA wins another gold medal, the 5th consecutive gold medal for the men's side in Team USA. And it got a little bit wild there, right? They had us in the first half, not going to lie. The Serbians, Nikola Jokic, looking as impressive as ever in his performance, especially in that first half. But Steph Curry caught fire, right? And I wanted to talk about this from a Grizzlies perspective. Obviously, we're all on the same team, right? Team USA. It's great to see the United States continue their dominance. And it's still dominance, right? Like the United States went undefeated in tournament play, obviously, because they won the gold medal, undefeated in group play. They were very clearly the best team. The gap is shrunk, like we mentioned a little bit ago. There's no denying that. But when you see performances like what Steph Curry did and how he very clearly elevated his legacy in those 2 games, played very poorly going into that Serbia semifinal, right? And because of his shooting, you can easily argue, if it wasn't for Steph, the United States doesn't win the gold medal because they don't have the capacity to do what Steph Curry did, especially against Serbia, but even against France to close out that gold medal game. And the legacy of Steph Curry is going to be something that's talked about a lot over the next several years. Every once in a while, you'll see somebody that has the hot take of him being more important to the NBA than LeBron James. I don't know that I agree with that. You can maybe make the argument that Steph Curry has been as important to the game of basketball, and that is an important differentiation to make. Steph Curry has made shooting the 3 sexy, right? If you remember the 1990s, I'm old here, okay? So forgive me. If you weren't around in the 1990s, and it's clouded by the steroid era and steroid controversies, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, that famous home run race, chicks dig the long ball, right? That was one of the things that really changed the game of baseball at the time. And of course, the steroids issues negated that a decent bit historically. Steph Curry's not on steroids, right? Maybe there's a performance enhancer, but he's never tested positive for, at least to the best of my knowledge. And Steph Curry is just an extremely gifted basketball player who has changed the game in a way that I do think is standing the test of time and will stand the test of time. The ability to space the floor. And there's lots of different ways to do it, right? But the tried and truest way at this stage in 2024 is to have 3-point shooting. And Steph Curry can shoot 3-pointers pretty much anywhere in the gym. He is the absolute best 3-point shooter in the history of the game. But for me, sitting there watching this game conclude in my chair as a Memphis Grizzlies former blogger, now podcaster, I couldn't help but, again, I was a bit of a hater to Victor Wembanyama there a moment ago. Of all those guys, like Steph Curry is the rival, right? I guess you could say LeBron James in recent years with the Lakers the last couple seasons, but for me, it's Steph. Steph is the Grizzlies' rival. Steph is the guy that stirs that drink. He's the one that has made Memphis's own postseason goals fade, not just for one generation. He did it to the grit and grind Grizzlies, and then he has done it to this era, the next gen Grizzlies with Ja Morant. So watching Steph Curry succeed, I, as a fan of Team USA and the United States of America overall, can be thrilled that the greatest shooter in the history of the game that has changed the trajectory of basketball forever, the way that it's played. I can take solace in saying, hey, that's pretty cool. It was a phenomenal performance. But watching Steph Curry have that level of success as a Memphis Grizzlies fan, hurt a little bit, I'm not going to lie. And it also made me ponder, what is Golden State doing to accentuate the fact that they're at the end of the Steph Curry rope here? He's going to be gone by 2028. There are most folks, the way that people reacted to the end of that game, Kevin Durant, I think roughly 36 years old right now. LeBron James, we know at 39. Steph Curry's around 36. These guys are going to be either over 40 or pushing 40 when the 2028 games in LA come around. They're almost certainly not going to be there. That means Steph Curry has maybe 3 years of basketball left in the NBA, give or take. What in the world is Golden State doing to maximize that? I don't see it. Jonathan Kuminga is not the answer, I don't think. They need another piece. Andrew Wiggins still staying there. AirPods, my boy Brandon Podziemski. That's not going to get the job done. Who are they going to bring in to support Steph? Because Draymond Green and Andrew Wiggins are not the answer. Who is that going to be? Watching that game from a Grizzlies perspective, we talk all the time about Golden State falling out, dropping down. How can the Warriors let that happen? You have the absolute best three-point shooter alive and that's ever lived on your roster. And you're just going to roll out there with two guys that are, 23, 22 years old and hope that they're going to do the best they can as key contributors? That's different than Memphis, where you've got guys like Jaren Jackson Jr., who's young, but he's played 7 NBA seasons. AirPods is going to be in his second year. I'm not talking about Gigi Jackson as the starter like other people are, for that exact reason. You can't look at your team as a legitimate contributing contender and depend so heavily on a player that's that inexperienced, at least in my opinion. It's possible, I suppose. It's happened from time to time, but that's not the norm. And if I was Golden State, I'd be making some calls. Some other takeaways from the Olympics. I really was impressed with LeBron James, being the FIBA tournament MVP at 39 years old. The GOAT argument, LeBron versus Jordan, to me, it's not an argument anymore. It's LeBron James. Look at what he's doing at his age. I remember watching old Michael Jordan, who could still score and do some things. He was not anywhere near the realm of what LeBron is doing. The longevity of James's career takes it for me. I think it's LeBron. It was also great to see KD get his flowers too. Those three guys, Steph, LeBron, and KD, the ones that have defined the last 14 years plus of United States basketball as a whole in the NBA in the micro sense. To see those three guys compete and play so well at various times, helping get the United States to the gold medal, fulfilling a commitment that LeBron pushed a year ago, I thought that was really cool. And I give credit where it's due there. Because, I would much rather see Ja Morant out there, but I'm biased. I'm a Memphis Grizzlies guy. LeBron, KD, and Steph promised to participate. They did, and they helped this team win. How's he going to look in 2028? We have 4 years to figure that out. I'm pretty confident Ja Morant's going to be there. And I'm also pretty confident that Ja Morant's only going to be 29 in 2028. That's because I can do simple math, and Ja Morant turned 25 over the weekend. We're going to talk about Ja Morant at the age of 25 coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But I want to remind you of Locked On NBA. That should most certainly be your second listen later on today once this episode ends. Locked On NBA, I'm sure they'll talk about the Olympics. They have all sorts of great perspectives from all around the league. You can check it out audio, visual, just the same way that you check out Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're going to find Locked On NBA, another proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. We're talking Ja Morant and what his 25th year should look like in the NBA, 25th year on the planet should look like in the NBA. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode. No to Michael Cole. I miss him terribly like I always do. He'll be back on the next show. That, of course, to Michael Cole is the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. We've talked about Memphis, in my opinion, being overlooked by San Antonio of all teams in the Christmas Day schedule as announced by Shams Charania. We talked about Team USA and how I felt watching as a Grizzlies fan these three players that have in varying ways have stifled the Grizzlies throughout the years, seeing them get their just rewards in that gold medal win that likely ends their international basketball careers. Ja Morant's international basketball career is just beginning. And again, he turned 25 over the past weekend. And I'm so happy to have the chance to defend Ja Morant. Not that he needs it. He most certainly doesn't. But I do think that narrative concept, and DeMichael talks a lot about that. For those of you that are everydayers, you hear him say the narrative is a real driving force in terms of how things get chosen by the league, ratings matter, all that sort of stuff. And I do believe that the small market of Memphis, the volatile nature of what Ja's last couple of years have looked like in terms of health and other things, I get it to an extent. But Ja has done so much, especially this summer, to try to show that it's time to move on. And I hope that the NBA and NBA fans as a whole, we know that sneaker fans are moving on pretty much, right? Because Ja's shoes still sell very well. But this feels like a time for redemption. And I want to keep bringing up that number 25, his age, because he's still so young, right? He's a grown man. I'm not going to make excuses for grown men. But at the same time, when I was 25 years old, I was in the process of getting married, right? I was in the thinking if I was going to get married. I was in the process of living in Memphis, Tennessee, and looking at my life and trying to decide what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. Ja has had similar thoughts, I'm sure, all in the midst of being one of the biggest young stars in the entire NBA. And for someone who, as we talked about here on Locked On Grizzlies numerous times, AAU side courts, Murray State, not used to the bright lights, at least not until he got to Murray State and started to get some more attention. That had to be a shock to his system. And I think that we see more and more evidence of growth in him. And that matters a lot. You don't want him to lose his versatility, and you certainly don't want him to lose the mentality that got him here. He is the poster child for what the Memphis Grizzlies clearly look like or look for in terms of a type. This is a young man who has gotten every bit of juice out of the squeeze in terms of his talent, still has areas of his game he can develop. But again, he was not a highly sought-after recruit. And if you go up and down the Grizzlies roster, Jaren Jackson Jr. maybe being the only example, but Jaren was not drafted by this front office. Guys that work their tails off on the court, guys that have maximized their talent. Desmond Bane's a great example of that. Santi Aldama is a great example of that. Marcus Smart, who they traded for, is a great example of that. And I do believe that Ja's mentality in that way is going to serve him well as he approaches a very important season for him. Not in terms of contract. There's no extension to discuss. He signed that. He's getting his money. But in terms of him trying to get back to where he was, right? He was going to be the face of a Powerade ad campaign. He was going to be the next guy. I mentioned that earlier in the show with Brian Windhorst. People forget that. Memphis doesn't forget that. Memphis remembers. I remember that Ja Morant was the heir apparent to the throne that King James currently sits in. It was crystal clear. A lot has happened since then. But as DeMichael pointed out on a recent episode, the American people love a redemption story, and Ja Morant is going to provide that. I'm confident in saying that because A, he's so young, just turned 25. B, he has a lot of skin in the game. Again, plenty of money. That's not necessarily the concern. But he has reached the stage of his career in terms of his life as well. Now it's time to win. Now we're talking about legacy. Now we're talking about advertisers coming back to you and having a chance to be that billionaire in Memphis, Tennessee that we've heard DeMichael and others talk about. One of his goals with his mother, trying to build up a brand and a dynasty financially. Good for you. I say all the time, maximize your worth when people are willing to give you monopoly money to play a game. Good for you. That's how capitalism works, right? That's the system. As a teacher, do I wish people would pay me more because I do this such an important job, allegedly? Yeah, selfishly, but that's not what our society values. Ja Morant is elite at basketball, and that's one of the things that we value. That's one of the things we want to watch. We want to see. We want a distraction, and Ja can provide that in a way that a lot of NBA players can't. That is going to matter. The first highlight reels that come out after the first 10 games or so, I think it's going to refresh a lot of memories. I remember that dude doing those things. He didn't go away. He hasn't disappeared off the face of the earth. He's not retired. Hasn't had an injury force him to leave the game forever. At the age of 25, it is so interesting to me to see a player that was at the precipice of everything. Not there anymore, clearly, but still has all the same skills and all the same abilities, all the same charisma, energy. You know, we've talked about Allen Iverson on here before. The ability to impact basketball culturally, not just on the court, but off of it. Anthony Edwards doesn't have that. I'm sorry, he does not. Has nothing to do with Minnesota. It has to do with him. He has a great personality. I think he's a great star. But if you were around for Iverson, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's an aura. It's a vibe. It's the way that Morant carries himself. And it resonates, and it stands out, and it makes him unique. You have to be on the court. Availability is the greatest ability there is. Not disputing that in any way, shape, or form. But I just think it's wild that so many have just moved on from a guy who just turned 25, who has shown time and again that he has the capacity to be one of the very best in the NBA. I think year 25 for Ja on this planet is going to be a big one. I think he's going to remind everybody that has forgotten just what Ja Morant can do when he is on the basketball court. And one of the biggest beneficiaries is going to be the Memphis Grizzlies. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode of the show. Happy birthday to Ja Morant. Congratulations to Team USA Basketball. And shame on you, NBA, for not picking Memphis and going with the San Antonio Spurs on Christmas Day instead. Trust me, as a podcaster that would have to do a podcast on Christmas Day, I'm not necessarily bummed out in that particular way, but it is cool to see Memphis get that national spotlight maybe next year after Ja fulfills the potential of this redemption arc that we've been talking about. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Make sure you're subscribing on an audio platform as well as the visual over at YouTube. We're getting close to 4,000 subscribers there. Thank you all so much. Let's get past that number here in the next couple of weeks. Make sure you're checking out Locked On NBA for your second listen, your second watch as we end this episode of the show. We'll be back on Wednesday. We have a schedule potentially coming out soon. So in the next couple of shows, we'll certainly be discussing that. The idea of a Luke Kennard replacement. We talked about that briefly with Cam Spencer. Obviously, there's other guys that could be on the roster in that mix. Maybe we'll talk about that on Wednesday's show. Amazon, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts, make sure you are becoming an everydayer if you are not already one, hanging out with myself and DeMichael each and every time an episode drops here on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode. Until next time, stay locked in. Have a great start to your week, and we will see you in the middle of the week as we grind through the offseason here on Locked On Grizzlies. See ya.